In the 1860s, it was gold that brought wealth to Otago. When Gabriel Reid discovered gold at Tuapeka in 1861, thousands of hopeful prospectors flocked to the province from many parts of the world. Other gold strikes followed, as thousands of pounds worth of the precious metal were sluiced from creeks and rivers. Communities with strange or romantic names sprang up. Names like Dunstan, Tinkers, Dry Bread, St Bathans and Bannockburn. Another, high in the Dunstan Mountains, was called Bendigo. Like many Goldfield stories, it's one of courage and of perseverance against the odds. The Bendigo story really begins in September 1862. For most prospectors, it began here on the banks of the Clutha, about halfway between Cromwell and Terrace. Up on the terrace above me, one of Central Otago's transitory gold mining towns sprang up. It was called Wakefield and sometimes called Crippletown. The gold had been discovered up in the hills behind, probably by a group of prospectors who'd come across from the eastern side. Well, of course, it didn't take very long for hundreds of prospectors to hear about the new goldfield. They had to walk up from Cromwell, usually on the other side of the river. They came across to this side of the river by the aid of a punt service operated by an enterprising Hugh Macpherson. One of the first buildings at Wakefield was a hotel and store started by Sam Box, a Cornishman, and his Irish wife, Anne. Apparently, they were a popular couple, and their establishment was a haven for the prospectors. But once they'd stocked up with provisions, the hopefuls would make the 3-mile trek to Bendigo Creek. Their hope? To make their fortune. Well, the countryside here above the creek is wild and inhospitable and pretty barren. There are tales of vicious cold winters and blistering hot summers and no shade. And remember that those early miners lived in tents. Looking down on the creek today, it's not hard to imagine those tents ranged up and down each side of the creek. The creek, by the way, today has largely disappeared because it's been diverted for irrigation. The men no doubt worked very close to their humble abode, looking for that gold that they knew must be there. Well, in fact, the Bendigo alluvial goldfield was not a rich one. We're told from the archives that very few people actually made a great deal from their efforts up here at Bendigo Creek. So all that's really left today of their efforts are the tailings and a few ruined buildings like this hotel. Of course, every goldfield's got its stories. That's one thing that is left behind. And as far as Bendigo's concerned, there's one story about a girl called Mary Ann who caused quite a stir when she arrived at the workings here. Apparently she was due to get married in Cromwell one Saturday afternoon, but she was stood up by her intended. Evidently she wasn't a girl to get depressed, so she promptly raffled her wedding cake. This gave her quite a tidy sum, we're told. She then went to work for Mrs. Box in her hotel. She was persuaded to put on her wedding dress as a bit of a publicity stunt. The miners, of course, heard about this, and as she was the first single girl ever to appear on the Bendigo diggings, this caused quite a stir. They immediately downed tools and raced off to the pub. And we're told that the ensuing party lasted for about a week. But like most gold rushes, the alluvial rush at Bendigo didn't last very long. Within about a couple of years, the diggers were leaving for more promising places. New gold strikes were being made all the time, and it was normal for miners to head for the richest areas. By 1866, most diggers had gone, some disenchanted. wasn't the end of Bendigo. As the miners left, one Thomas Logan was about to open Chapter 2 of the Bendigo story. The departing miners weren't to know that Bendigo would shortly see a bonanza. As the diggings were abandoned, Logan was trying to convince the world that there were quartz reefs under the hills and that they were rich in gold. He did manage to convince Thomas Goodyer, and the two formed the Cromwell Quartz Mining Company. Alluvial gold mining and quartz gold mining were two entirely different things. Instead of washing shingle from a river to obtain the gold, with quartz mining, you dug a mine, removed the quartz from the mine, and crushed it. And you crushed it using one of these. It's called a battery, or a stamper battery. What in fact happens is that the quartz is fed into the machine and is crushed by hammers, or stampers. The crushed material's then washed out, the gold falls through perforated copper plates, it then amalgamates with mercury placed under the copper plates, and later on it's separated off. Well, Logan and Goodyer bought a battery and installed it at the bottom of the range beside Bendigo Creek, where it was driven by water wheel. Work began in May 1869, and within 10 days the company had got 238 ounces of gold. The second Bendigo gold rush had begun. It didn't take long for Logan's and Goodyer's success to become widely known, and a new breed of miner, content to work for wages for companies, arrived on the scene. And with the new breed, a number of new towns sprang up. One was called Bendigo. It was here on the flat at the bottom of the ranges. We're told that in 1870, its main street, York Street, was lined on both sides for a quarter of a mile with 6 hotels, 6 restaurants, the A1 bakery, a butcher's shop, a clothier named Isaac the Jew, and an institution called the Miners' Temperance Restaurant Hotel, whatever that was. Well, there's not much left today, although the bakery is still standing. It's hard to imagine, I suppose, the countless thousands of loaves of bread that were made in the ovens in the bakery, and the stories it can tell. The bakery survived probably because it was made of stone. Most of Bendigo's buildings were of iron or mud or wood, and when people moved to a new field, they probably took their premises with them. And like so many mining towns, Bendigo lasted only a few years. Well, Bendigo wasn't the only town to spring up. Up the hill towards the mines was Logan Town. It was the same size as Bendigo, or possibly bigger. It was only a short distance from the workings. Well, here on the hillside, several hundred feet above Logan Town, we're at the real heart of the Bendigo quartz field. It was here that Logan and Goodyer started to mine. Before this place was abandoned, over $1 million worth of gold was removed. For 20 years, the hills echoed to the sound of the batteries. Mine shafts were dug straight down into the hills. Quartz was removed, crushed, and the rubbish left in huge red or grey slag heaps. This hole is Logan's #1 mine, and it's nearly 600 feet deep. It's a dangerous business walking around here these days, with many of the holes overgrown and hidden. And there's an eerie silence about it. But in the 1870s, things were quite different. In one 8-week period, Logan's firm crushed rock which yielded 4,000 pounds worth of gold. That's about $1,000 a week at 1870 values. By that time, there were 52 claims up here and 400 people. The work was hard, but there was a social life too. When one company launched its operation, it held a grand ball in one of the Logan town hotels. Newspapers said it was a magnificent affair, but that the dance floor left something to be desired. A week's blasting operations would have improved it immensely, according to one witty soul. Through the 70s, Bendigo was on the crest of a wave. Mine companies were making a lot of money. In 1 year, Logan got 28,000 pounds worth of gold. Cornish miners did a lot of the work. They lived nearby. One can only guess at the amount of booze that this pub served. In the 1880s, Bendigo started to wind down. The bonanza was ending. Logan left Bendigo a wealthy man, and so did others. As shafts got deeper, the costs rose and water began to fill them up. Miners and companies fell out over wages, and there was a strike. Once again, as people prepared to abandon Bendigo, another chapter, the final one as it happened, was about to begin. A short distance away, down the mountainside, is what's come to be known as Todd's Tunnel. It was built in the 1890s, and it heads 2,000 feet horizontally into the mountain. The idea was to approach the quartz reefs from the side rather than the top, and also to drain some of the water out of the other shafts. Well, in fact, over the years this tunnel was quite successful. Quite a lot of gold was obtained, but not enough. Work stopped in 1914. It restarted again in the 1930s, but was finally abandoned in 1937. And that's really all there is to the Bendigo story up till now. There are those who say that given the price of gold going up to a sufficient level, they could make this tunnel pay.